Hello, everybody, and welcome to Find My Past from Home. We are excited to have you with us as always. We hope you're having a really good week. And it's Wednesday. I can't actually believe it's Wednesday, and it's the last week of March, which is also really crazy to me. So let us know where you're at, who you are, what you're working on. We'd love to hear from you. For those of you who tune in regularly, it's always great to see you. Thank you so much for being with us. For those of you who are new to Find My Past from Home, we are really excited to have you as a part of our community. So welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Jen Baldwin, and I am the Research Specialist and North American Content Manager for Findmypast. And I am just back this week from a bit of leave. I spent 10 days or so with the business in England, visited London for the first time in over 3 years, or almost 3 years actually. And then actually, of course, got COVID and got stuck there for an extra week. So it was a long 2 weeks for me. And then I had a couple days off last week. So I'm back now. And I will apologize in advance. My throat and my cough is still a little bit raw from being sick. So I have been drinking lots of water and sucking down throat lozenges and stuff. So forgive me in advance if I cough or have a little bit of a scratchy throat today. And as a result of that, I'll probably not do a full hour today, just to give everybody that heads up. But we'll see where the discussion leads us. It's always great to see what you guys have to contribute to these conversations. So maybe we will stretch for an hour. I don't know. We will have Ellie in the comments with us today. She's just finishing up a meeting, but she'll be with us shortly. So everybody say hello to Ellie when she pops in. You'll see her pop into the comments. All right. And lots of you already tuning in. So thank you very much, William. It's always good to see you. Ellen, Andrea, Georgia, Grace, Irgo, Debonair, Janet, Sarah, June, another Janet, Gail, Victoria, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody, it's really, really good to see you guys. When I go on leave, it's always something to stop and think about, because I do kind of go, oh, I should tune in on Fridays and Wednesdays and see what's going on and just say hello to everybody. But I kind of have to pull myself away from it to really get a full break. Paul is with us from I almost said Washington, Paul, but you said Warrington. It's just like automatic on my brain. Roxanne's in Utah, Karen's in North London. June. Oh, thank you, June. That's nice of you. Yeah, Carolyn is with us. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It's always, always, always good. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the 1921 census. Surprise. But we're going to really look at it from this question of diversity and kind of multiculturalism. And you know that I've talked about this before, right? I have other sessions from the launch, since January, on this topic, where I've given a lot of examples of people that I have discovered in the census that are non-native, non-citizens, perhaps, of England and Wales. But today I really want to think about, from a strategic standpoint, how do we actually see the impact of the 1921 census from a global research perspective? And I also want to look at kind of some of the statistics around the census, right? To give you an idea of the possibilities, right? So the 1921 census of England and Wales obviously is a massive project, 38 million names, but not all of them are actually permanent residents of England and Wales, right? A lot of them were visitors. And it's a census that is unique to other countries, right? Because they recorded visitors in this way, because they recorded people who were in vessels just offshore, because they recorded the entire population of hotels, et cetera. You have this, kind of much bigger range of diversity in terms of the population that was collected and the information that was collected. So we're going to look at that in some detail today. So let me go ahead and Oh, yeah, and Roxanne, yeah, actually perfect timing, Roxanne. So much census stuff this year. I'm currently counting down to the 1950 release. Exciting stuff. It is exciting, right? And most of us in the United States are very aware that the 1950 US Census will be released on April 1st, which is this Friday. It will be made available in the public domain from the National Archives. So it will be available on many major genealogy websites, including just through the National Archives itself. So if you are interested in kind of more recent US Census material, be looking at the 1950 census. And I would refer you actually to the National Archives website and blog if you have questions about that. They have some wonderful information about how to use the census, especially in its earliest forms before those transcriptions and indexes get created. So it's a huge project, and we're excited about it. It is census year for sure for genealogy, which is really exciting. Okay, so let me add my slides here. We're going to really talk about around the world with the 1921 census of England and Wales. And this could be construed in a number of different ways, right? This is a big, broad topic. So I would anticipate that I'll do many more sessions around this theme because there's just so much to think about and so much to look at in the census, in the 1921 census, that it really is just kind of this resource that never stops giving, right? But let's look at it from kind of this viewpoint of multiculturalism first. Let's look at the numbers. If you break down the population that is covered in the census, they really think about, and you can find most of this information in the official reports, and I'll share that with you as well during the session. But if you look at the population, they obviously focus on England and Wales. So anything outside of that is considered part of this diversity question according to the official reports of the census. So the largest population, of course, outside of English and Welsh is Irish, with just shy of 365,000 people identified as being Irish born, right? So when we're thinking about their place of origin and their their citizenship status, their naturalization status, we're really looking at birthplace, birth location. So that's what this data is all based on. Scotland comes in at number two, not surprising, right? And then you start to look at how that all breaks down outside of kind of the British Isles. So people who are British born in foreign countries, including the Indian Empire and other dominions. That category, British born in foreign countries, is at 100,000. Indian Empire is at 74,000, and so forth, right? We see a huge population of Russians and those of the former Empire of Russia. So that includes a number of different territories, 39,000 people now residing and counted in the England census for 1921. Canada and Newfoundland, of course, Newfoundland at this time is its own separate entity. It's not part of Canada yet. So it's two different places technically. And then the list, the top 10 list continues with Poland, Australia, and South Africa. Now, some of these locations may not be a big surprise, right? Because we are talking about the British Empire. We're talking about British dominions and territories and colonies. As we go through the 1920s and 30s, that starts to break down, and these individuals suddenly become, citizens of individual countries versus members of the British Empire. So this is kind of one of the last national resources that I'm aware of, at least, that really identifies all of these locations as the British Empire and allows us to see what the British Empire really looked like kind of at its peak before it starts to enter its decline. Just looking through the comments, so my head's going back and forth. Oh, still talking about the weather. Okay, that's good. Yeah, you know what? I didn't even talk about the weather. Colorado today is very chilly. Um, Yesterday it was really warm. Day before that was even warmer. And so yesterday we had rain, which is kind of unusual actually from my area of Colorado. Today it might snow, um, but it's spring. And so that's what happens. Uh, lots and lots of changes in the weather here. Okay. Yeah, just looking through the comments, lots of people just still talking about the weather. Okay, that's good. Yeah. All right. So as we get into kind of what the census tells us, right, from a statistical standpoint, we need to understand what's happening over the course of history at this place, right? The British Empire is on its decline, although they don't really know that yet. It started down that road. So this is a really interesting opportunity for us as researchers. And you guys have heard me say this before. I really do think it's valuable to understand this big picture kind of historical viewpoint. Yes, we can absolutely use the census to hone in on that one particular ancestor or that family group or maybe that house history project that we're working on. But it's important to understand what's happening from a national and global perspective so that we can really understand the census and the impact of the census in its place and time, right? It's really, really important. I think it's important. I also think it's really interesting, right? So from a standard curiosity point of view, you want to know these things just because it helps inform your research on that individual level. So lots to take in here. So I'm going to share lots of graphs and charts and statistics over the next 20 minutes or so, and hopefully this helps kind of open some of your mind and thinking as well in terms of how you can use this information to really dig into the 1921 census in a more detailed and nuanced way. Now there are a number of reports that were issued alongside the census. Most of them were published kind of later in the 1920s because, of course, it takes time to actually take that raw data from the household returns and turn it into statistics, right? So the first one that was published, at least as far as I'm aware, is the preliminary report, and the official title is on the screen: Preliminary Report, including tables of the population enumerated in England and Wales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The 19th and 20th of June, 1921. This was actually published in 1927. So this is the initial report that tabulates the population that was identified in the census. And even in this preliminary report, they are immediately comparing to 1911. So we get this table of statistics that tells us that we have an increase or a decrease compared to 1911. But you also see areas in which there is no information, right? So in this chart, for example, Ireland is not represented in the 1921 census, and we should all know why by now. The 1921 census of Ireland never took place because they were doing a few other things at the time. We also see that the information from Canada is not available. And that is because, and I'll talk about this again in a few minutes, the Canadian census was actually just taken at the same time that the 1921 census of England and Wales was taken. So they're not yet done tabulating their reports in Canada. So they haven't sent that information across to make it available to the general public yet. So there is no comparison for Ireland or Canada for those reasons. But we can see the increase in the period in terms of the number of people for Great Britain, Australia, and its Commonwealth, New Zealand, the Indian Empire, and the Union of South Africa, right? Counting various aspects of the population. So it gives us kind of this general overview of how the British Empire was really growing, right? These are territories inside the empire, right? All of these countries that we now think of as kind of independent states are, of course, at this point, still part of the empire, and and still being counted as part of that population in terms of what the empire controls. Ellie has joined us. Everybody say hi to Ellie. She is in the London office today. She has traveled by train and she's probably tired, but she doesn't look tired. She's saying no. All right. So everybody say hello to Ellie and make sure that you appreciate she's in London today um, with our colleagues in the office. It looks very bright there, Ellie. Very bright. Okay. Yeah. All the lights are on behind her. All right. So when we think about the British Empire and Great Britain, right, we need to obviously think about not just these kind of outlying territories, but also what's happening around the British Isles, right, if you will. Forgive the use of that term. So The census tells us, and these reports tell us that for Scotland, Ireland, the Isle of Man, and Channel Islands, there are statistics available through the 1921 census for these areas. So these are people who are considered to be born elsewhere in the British Isles. And that's the language that's in the census report. So we know from the 1921 census that the Scottish are numerically greater than in 1911, but proportionally lower in terms of population, right? So there are more Scottish born and represented in the 1921 census, but proportionally, the percentage of Scottish living in England and Wales has reduced compared to 1911. The Irish born continued to decline in 1921, and we saw that from 1861 to 1911. There are less and less Irish born individuals living in England and Wales. However, there's still more of them than Scottish born, right? So if you're looking at the kind of the main countries of the British Isles, there are more people who are born in Ireland living in Ireland than England and Wales in 1921, but they are on the decline, right? So there are more people born in Ireland kind of staying in Ireland, right? That's what that tells us. Or not in England and Wales, possibly in Scotland, or possibly they're starting to separate themselves between Ireland and Northern Ireland, right? So they're classifying themselves as in a different way. And that again comes from that kind of larger overview of history, kind of knowing what's happening around the world during the period in which this record is created. And then we also see that the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands population, people born in those locations, really peaked in 1901 and was on the decline in 1911 and then again in 1921. So of those people kind of born elsewhere in the British Isles but living in England and Wales, these are the statistics that we can learn. We can see that the Scottish population is numerically greater but proportionally lower than 1911. So if you're looking for people who are born in Scotland, born in Ireland, and you're not quite finding them in the 1920s where you think they should be, then that teaches us that we need to look at English and Welsh record sets like the 1921 census to be able to continue that story. If nothing else, use the census to eliminate them as residing in England and Wales as an option. And maybe they're not even living there. Maybe they're just on holiday, right? So, in terms of British subjects, then, right, if we take this to one level a little bit bigger, right, go away from the British Isles and look at all British subjects, the 1921 census saw the most individuals enumerated as born in other British dominions and colonies than any previous census. And that makes sense if you think about what we started with, which is the idea that the population of the British Empire as a whole is increasing, right? In every territory, the population is going up almost universally. Even if it's just a little bit of a difference, we know that those large territories in the British Empire are on the rise from a population standpoint. So this statistic really, right, it is common sense almost that there is a larger population from any previous census. But we also know that because they are born in other British dominions and colonies, but residing in England and Wales, most likely, right, for the census, then we can see that there is more travel between the empire, the dominions, and back to England and Wales proper. So there is a lot we can infer from this particular statistic. We know the population is on the rise. We know that travel is easier. Obviously, World War I has just happened. So there's a lot going on globally that is going to make an impact on where these people are residing and why they're making those decisions, which, at the end of the day is probably the question we're all most interested in anyway. Why are they making the decision to leave South Africa or leave Australia and maybe not come back to, but come to England and Wales? On the other hand, the British subjects by birth or by naturalization was essentially equivalent to 1911. So while we see more people enumerated in the census as being born in other British dominions, the total number of British subjects by birth or naturalization is essentially equivalent to 1911. And there's a number of factors there as well, right? We've lost a huge amount of the population during the war, so that plays an impact, and skews the numbers a bit, right? If World War I had never happened, you have to assume that that point about British subjects would be an increase rather than an equivalency. Excuse me. So I'm going to go glance at the targets or at the comments for just a second. John is saying the sister of his Scottish second great grandfather was living in Yorkshire for the 1921 census. And Shirley makes a comment saying the Irish are all in England building the railways. Yes, absolutely. Occupation and jobs is a huge impact here. Sarah points out that as a New Zealander living in Scotland, the New Zealand statistic does not include the Maori. I saw that myself and noted it. I thought it was very interesting. I don't have enough information to be able to explain that, Sarah, or understand why. It's something I'm still kind of learning about and digging into. But also, I thought quite interesting um, little tidbit there that they didn't count that. Um, yeah. Okay, I'm just looking, yeah, okay. I think the comments are good. So, we have posed the question in the chat. Were any of your ancestors in the 1921 census born outside of England and Wales? We would love to hear about them. So please comment if you have discovered that, or even if you suspect it might be true and you haven't looked yet. Now is a great time to kind of start that conversation. Okay, so there's one other category that we need to cover from the 1921 census, and that is those who simply didn't tell the census, didn't fill in that part. They didn't say where they were born, and these are classified as not stated. So in the 1921 census and the 1891 census, persons born abroad whose nationality was not stated are classified as such, not stated. All the other censuses for England and Wales, these individuals were classed as British subjects if they had distinctly British surnames and were not natives of the United States. So if you have someone in the 1911 census who doesn't fill in that birth information and their last name is Smith, they were classified as British. Whether or not that's true is up for debate, but that's how the census reports were tabulated in the moment, in the time. Birthplaces that were not stated were included with those born in England and Wales for all censuses except 1911 and 1921. So if they didn't state their birthplace, whether or not they were citizens or subjects of the British Empire, those were included with all those born in England and Wales, except for those two censuses, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So that not stated category is a relatively small percentage of the 1921 census as a whole, but still important to recognize. And that discrepancy between the 1921 and 1891 census and all of the other censuses is important to note. If you have someone in 1911 who the implication is that they're British because of their surname, but in 1921 it says that they're actually Canadian. Well, that's a discrepancy you might be scratching your head around a little bit. But if you go back to the way they actually organized the results and the assumptions they made when the census was taken, that could explain that discrepancy, right? So it's important to understand kind of some of that background on each of the censuses and how it was taken. So important to note that not stated bit, especially if there's a discrepancy in their citizenship. So how does this compare, right? We can see all sorts of information from the reports that are available to us for all the census years. But some that I found interesting include the measure of increase versus decrease of the persons born in the dominions and colonies compared to 1911, right? We talked about this a little bit, but let's break it down into some detail. So I made this little table to try and make it a little easier. If there is an up arrow, that means the population increased in 1921 compared to 1911. And if there's a down, then it's a decrease, right? Hopefully that makes sense. The light blue arrows are a change of less than 100 people, right? So if you take Newfoundland, for example, there was a slight decrease in the number of people in the 1921 census born in Newfoundland compared to the 1911 census by less than 100 people. If the arrow is green, it was a change of less than 1,000, and all the dark blue arrows are a change of 1,000 or more, and some of them actually in the tens of thousands, right? The Dominion of Canada, for example, had a population increase in the 1921 census of more than, I want to say it was almost 11,000 people compared to 1911. So as we've been discussing, just keep in mind that all of these are based on the 1921 census, right? So these are people found in the 1921 census who are born in these locations, but currently enumerated in England or Wales for whatever reason they were there. So you have a small group of people who are not specified that they're from a dominion or a colony, but they don't say which one. And then you have an increase in Europe, Asia, including the Indian Empire and all the other locations in Asia. You have an increase in the Union of South Africa, in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. You have a smaller increase in the other Australasian colonies and in the West African colonies. And then you have a small decrease in other African colonies, Newfoundland, the West Indies, and then that non specified category. So when you're thinking about the 1921 census, you absolutely want to be looking at the census no matter where your research is based. If you can't find your Australian ancestor for some reason in that period of the 1920s, he could very easily be in England on business, right? So it's important to go back and check kind of all of these national categories, all of these national records to check and make sure that they're there or they're not, right? It's just part of that good, thorough research process. All right. So if we look again at the statistics, born in foreign countries, so excluding, for the most part, excluding those people who were born as part of the British Empire, there's a 12% decrease compared to the 1911 census. So there's actually more people in the 1911 census enumerated as born in a foreign country compared to 1921. There are just over 100,000 British subjects born in a foreign country, and then that leaves 228,000 aliens born in a foreign country. And that includes the 46,000 people that wrote not stated, that are classified in that not stated group. I'm throwing a lot of numbers and a lot of statistics at you, and you may seem like, how is this relevant to me? But it really does lead to our individual research. If we understand the population as a whole, we can better put our ancestors into context in that moment. If we find them in the 1921 census or not, right? It really allows us to create theories and a hypothesis around what our ancestor was up to during that time frame so that we can better track their life. So, where were these people actually living? Right. So the highest proportion of foreigners, of course, were in London, but you can break down all of the different areas of London, and these are in order of population in terms of proportion. Right. I didn't put the numbers on this slide, but again, all of this is available in the reports from the census, so you can find all of this statistical information for yourself. So London, of course, has the highest proportion of foreigners. And then outside of London, there are categories in which, or locations in which you can look specifically to see what was happening that might have attracted a particular population. So if you're interested in Manchester, for example, or Oxford, maybe there's really obvious reasons, like they're attending university or there's some major business that's um, housed there, or calls that location their home, their corporate headquarters. Maybe that's the primary reason why your ancestor was in that location. The reports take it a little further for us, and this is, I think, probably easily applied. So, I am American, and so I am kind of always curious about where you find American citizens or even Canadians in these international records. And I can see very easily, thanks to the reports, that for people born in the United States, London is obviously the most popular option in terms of where they were located in 1921. But Lancashire comes second, and then breaks down further to Liverpool and Manchester, and then York, and then Middle Essex, and then Surrey and Kent, and so forth. When you compare that to the Polish population, you see that there are a number of differences, right? In the Polish population leads is listed specifically in the report, but not for the US citizens. So there is definitely some work that can be done in terms of studying where each of these particular groups of cultures are using locations in England. Where are they settling? Where are they actually located? Right? There's very few from both ethnic groups in Wales, but Birmingham and Warwickshire obviously are big ones for both. And some of that makes common sense. Some of it is all based on the idea of what's available. They're metropolitan areas versus more rural areas. But there is some interesting discrepancies, and they have these tables available for every major population group found in the census. Okay. So, where again do we find all of this information? If you wanted to dig into the statistics, where do you go? Well, all of this that I've just showed you comes from the Census of England and Wales 1921 General Report with appendices. This is available for free on Find My Past. You just need to register as a user. There is this national report, this general report, but there is also a report for every county across England and Wales. And I highly recommend that you utilize these reports. Sit down and actually carve out some time to read through the information and see what's available to you. Um, Even if you're looking at a specific county, if your ancestors never left England, these reports are still very valuable. It really gives you the context and the background of the census that we all need to understand to make sure that we're understanding the census and everything it's offering to us in full. Okay, so let's go look at some comments here real quick. Um, yep. So William asked a great question. Do people from Ireland count as foreigners in 1921? Could be a large increase in London due to the uprising in Ireland, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, if they were born in Ireland, they were counted as not England, English, and Welsh, right? So they're not foreigners per se, but they are other parts of the empire, other parts of the British Isles is how they're classified. So it's all, again, based on birth location. But yes, William, they would have been counted as Irish specifically, not English or Welsh. And then Audrey makes this great comment. We found some interesting results for sailors' lodging houses in Cardiff. Lots of sailors were staying in lodgings where the head came from the same part of the world as they did. There's lots to investigate there. There's, what I love about records like the 1921 census is that we are just scratching the surface, right? There is years and years worth of research to do in this one record collection that's going to keep us all entertained for a long time. Um, all right. So if you are looking abroad, whether you're using the 1921 census as kind of your home base, if you were, um, or if you found someone in the 1921 census that you didn't expect, right? What is the best course of action? How do you actually process through that information and make the most of it? Well, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you're familiar with the nation you're researching and its sources, right? And if we look just at the census category, most of us will, of course, know that the United States takes their census on a decade by decade process as well, although it's on the zeros, not on the ones. So we have the 1920 US Census that's been available to us for many years. The 1921 Census of Canada is also an excellent resource from an international perspective because, again, it was taken in such a short time frame as the 1921 Census of England and Wales. Australian census materials actually vary, and they don't nationally keep their household returns. They pull the statistics from them and then they destroy the originals. But there are census substitutes that are available for the various states and territories across Australia. And then if we look further abroad outside of the English speaking world, the Russian Empire Census of 1897 is available. That is the national census for Russia. It's the only one that I know of that exists. And to my knowledge, there wasn't one taken in a more recent time frame compared to 1921. One of the best places to go for this type of information is the Family Search Wiki. It will help you identify possible record collections to take advantage of and use, and will point you as to where you might be able to find them, whether they're online or offline. So depending on the area in which you're working geographically, you really want to make sure that you know what's available to you, and that Family Search Wiki is probably one of the best places to start. I've mentioned Canada and Newfoundland a couple times, and let's delve into that just a little bit because it is so similar, right? The 1921 Census of England and Wales was taken on the 19th of June. The 1921 Census of Canada was taken on the 1st of June, so they're only 18 days apart. And if you really wanted to sit down and do a serious study on the English speaking population post World War One, these would be the two resources I think that you would use, right? There are over 8.7 million people in the 1921 Census of Canada. And because the dates are so strikingly similar, and that again is because the 1921 Census of England and Wales was delayed, they're only 18 days apart. This is an incredible opportunity to really explore our Canadian and British families kind of almost on identical days. Right? They're so closely, they're taken to so closely together that it's statistically you almost wouldn't even call them different, right? Um, so it is a fascinating opportunity for researchers. Um, and I think something that is a real opportunity for us as genealogists, historians, academics, etc. But we want to make sure that we're very careful in our research and our approach, right? So let's take a look at an example. This is Bayford Donald Patrick Bennett, and I picked him because he has such an outstanding name. He is 6 years old in the 1921 census, and he was born in Canada. Um, but it does say that he is a resident and he is British born. And it will commonly say that in the 1921 census because Canada at the time is, of course, a dominion of England, right? It's part of the British Empire. He is visiting the home of Helen Fairweather in Chandlersford, Hampshire, with his mom, Mary Winifred Bennett, excuse me. They are not enumerated in the 1921 census of Canada. So here is this 6-year-old boy who was born in Canada, but so at some point we can automatically say he has been in England at least 18 days, right? They are classified as visitors, but we don't want to make the assumption that they are actually residents of Canada or citizens of Canada or related to Canada in any way. The question is, why was he born in Canada? What actually made that, what series of events actually brought that on? Like why and how is it that he is now somehow in England with his mom, right? John asks a question in the comments, and this is the one I'm looking for, actually, John. I wonder there were anyone who were in both British and Canadian censuses. I would love to know the answer to that question as well. And that's something I've been digging for. I haven't found one yet, but if anybody finds one, finds someone who is in both, I would absolutely love to see it. So please share that with us if you discover it, because for me, it was just that would just be an incredible case study. I would love to see it. Because they're so close together, I just think that would just blow my mind, really. I mean, imagine the travel you would have to do. You'd like in the census and then pack all your stuff and get on a boat. And I don't remember exactly how long the voyage took then. I know I've looked it up before, but yeah, it would be very close, right? It would be very difficult to do. I think it would have to just be timed perfect. All right, let's get back to Bayford, though. So Bayford is born in Canada, living or a resident of England, a visitor in this household. So what's going on here? Well, we can see pretty easily um, that he was on a passenger list actually in 1916, so well before the 1921 census, right? And again, we're understanding that he's born in Canada, but he's not necessarily Canadian. Right. And in this case, he's just a very young boy and traveling with his mother. Um, and listed as arriving in Liverpool as a British passenger. He is, of course, in the 1939 register. He's actually living at on Queen's Park Avenue in Bournemouth, and he's an electrical sales engineer. He's single in the 1939 register, but wouldn't you know, just the next year later, he actually does get married to Rosamond Morgan, who apparently was quite a golfer. Won the Hampshire Championship in 1939, thanks to newspapers. We know that. Oh, and I have a circle here. And they are engaged in this article in 1939 and indicates later that the wedding was simply delayed by the war, but they anticipate being married soon. So This individual, Bayford, born in Canada, he's counted, of course, then in the 1921 census as a foreigner, right, or as part of part of the British Empire. Certainly not included as one of the statistics around those people born in England and Wales, but he is very clearly a resident and a citizen of England, right? He lives his entire life in England. He just happens to be born in Canada. Now, how that circumstance came about, I actually haven't uncovered yet. I don't know yet what brought his mother to Canada just for that long, just long enough to have a baby, it almost feels like. And I don't know who his father was just yet. But don't let the census, that indication of, Canadian birth location, throw you askew, right? We still want to look at those standard British record sources that tell us these lifelong stories. So that leads us, of course, then to the research process. We want to utilize all the information that's available to us for hints and suggestions. And the 1921 census is full of them, and it leads us down a variety of paths that allow us to research in a number of different ways. So think about all of your kind of standard or your go-to list of resources, right? So all applicable census returns for all countries, depending on where this person may be from or was born. You definitely want to look at passenger lists, especially the passenger list leaving the UK. That collection is available on Findmypast. And really, really does help carve the story and give you kind of the start and end times, right? If you're looking for someone from another country, you want to know what dates they were either in that country or born in that country and then returned and moved around England. The 1939 register is crucial. Newspapers, of course, are very important, electoral registers, and then any naturalization and citizenship records that might be available to you. Now, I noticed that Susan actually makes a really good point here. So great timing, Susan. In her comment saying that one of the frustrations as a Canadian researcher is that British citizens automatically became Canadian without any naturalization process or documentation. Right, absolutely. So there are pieces of this national story and this British Empire story that we need to understand so that we know what records are available to us. And that again takes me back to why I take time to read the reports from the census, why I take time to learn about what records are available and learn about the law and the policy and the procedure, because that tells me, that informs me what records I'm going to find and what records, more importantly, I'm not going to find. Because as Susan points out, that they were never created, right? So really, really, really important point there, Susan. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so let's take a look at another example. And I want you to just kind of put on your thinking caps for a second. And we're almost done with our time today. But think about this situation. This is Annie Jane Hicks. She is enumerated in the 1921 census. She is listed at born at sea. And there are very few people indicated in the 1921 census who are listed as at sea for a birth location, but she's one of them. She counts herself as an Australian citizen. She is a visitor. She's 63 years old. She's married to Edwin John Hicks, who is a retired jeweler. He's on line 5 of this census return. They are visitors in the household of Ernest Robert Legg and his wife Edith Christine Legg in Southgate. Ernest is the head of a freight department for Bullard King and Company Limited ship owners. So if you were to stumble upon Annie here in your research, what are the clues? What are the things that reach out to you that go, these are things that I need to understand better so that I can create a theory or actually show and display my family history why Annie and her husband Edwin are actually in England for the 1921 census. So when I look at the census return, the things that I see that really stick out to me, of course, are the fact that she is Australian, right? So I'm going to immediately think about what records I can access in Australia around her birth, her marriage, maybe her childhood. Why is an Australian citizen suddenly in England in 1921? Why is her husband not listed as Australian? Is he English? It implies that he actually identifies an English place of birth, but he doesn't say anything about Australia. So, is she an immigrant from an early age? What are the circumstances there that would lead them to actually be able to get married? And where does that marriage take place? I also want to know more about their host. I want to know about Ernest Robert Legg and his wife and their family and what the relationship is there. Why are they visitors in his household? He is a retired jeweler, and I want to know more about his occupation. But I immediately think that because Ernest is head of the freight department for Bullard King and Company, maybe there's some relationship there, right? Maybe this is an occupational relationship. Maybe they knew each other professionally in some capacity. At the same time, there is a huge age gap between Edwin and Annie and their hosts, Ernest and Edith. They are a good 20 years apart in different in age. So maybe this is a in-law situation, right? Maybe Annie is the mother-in-law of Ernest, or some other marital relationship that would make a lot of sense as to why this couple is visiting Ernest and his household in 1921. So there's a number of opportunities here for us to investigate, and a number of paths for us to go down. Now you can answer most of these questions with some really simple steps, right? The first thing I would do, honestly, is take the census return and turn it into an online tree. I would put that tree on Find My Past, and I would let the system start to cultivate hints to me so that I can immediately find kind of birth records, marriages, anything that's in England and Wales that is going to pop up as low hanging fruit that will probably explain the relationships pretty efficiently. And if it doesn't explain the relationship between these two different households, then I know I have more work to do. But creating that tree is one of the easiest things that I can do to start that process moving, right? Every research project I have, the first thing I do is create a tree because that low hanging fruit can be provided to me really, really in a very simple format. You don't have to accept every hint that is presented to you. You can absolutely take that information and do the research for yourself, but it gives you kind of that automated workflow that allows you to see immediately first thing, right? Okay, these two people got married on this date and they got married in England, but she is Australian and her parents are, and she's born in Australia, and it starts you down that path of understanding the story in a very organized and systematic way that then opens up all of your research time to actually do the more interesting bits, right? Like the newspaper research and passenger lists and things like that. Right. Okay. So, oh, and Audrey did a little digging for us. Thank you, Audrey. She checked with her friend, Mr. Google. I'm good friends with Mr. Google also. Says the fastest journey times were 15 days between Canada and England in 1921. So it is technically possible to be in the Canadian census and the 1921 census of England and Wales in 1921. So the search is on, right? That's the challenge. Can we as a community come up with a person who is in both the Canadian and the English and Wales census? All right, another couple good examples. Um, William notes that geography is important. Absolutely, lots of double place names, and he uses Portland as an example. There's an Portland in England, but also obviously in different U.S. states. There's Portland, Oregon, for example, and we have a California and Scotland, as well as, of course, the state of California. Absolutely vital, and especially I would think in North America, right? Because in the United States and Canada, there's this huge historical influence, obviously, from England and the British Isles as a whole. And so, of course, place names are carried over, right? That's why we have New York and New Jersey. That's where those locations originated. So, yeah, absolutely. Geography is really, really important. Claire, I would love that you by chance end up researching one of my ancestors and have them in one of your presentations. I would love to do that too, Claire. I think that would be delightful. It would be great to find someone and collaborate in that way. So if that ever happens, don't be shy. Make sure that you tell me, because most of my examples are just completely random. They're whoever I find in in the census, or in the records that looks interesting. Okay, let's go on then to just one more example that I wanted to showcase, and this is actually all right, this is a hotel return from 1921, of course, in London. And what I love about the hotel returns is their diversity, right? There's so much opportunity for us to do research. And I've used hotels as examples on these sessions before. This particular facility covers 2 pages worth of a census return. So it's not an overly large hotel, or if it is, it's not well occupied this on the 19th of June. The third page is actually blank. Um, and when you go into the record and you look at the original image, the one thing that struck me right away was that there's no address. There's no name of a hotel. There's nothing available for me to actually say this is the XYZ hotel in London. Now I know it's in London because of the other information that comes with the 1921 census. You don't just get the household return, you also get all of the instructions and the books from the enumerated enumeration process. So I know that this hotel is included in this particular area and location based on these books and these images. In fact, I can narrow it down. I know that it's in the parish of Hanover Square, or the area of Hanover Square. So I know that it's one of these hotels. And I know that's a little bit hard to read, but there are a number of hotels listed there. In these reports, in these extra images, you'll find things like the number of people who were enumerated in that particular location, or that particular hotel or institution, or whatever the situation is. You will find a number of little notations and stamps and notes from the census office. And these are the clues that are going to help us to identify which hotel this actually is. And I'll be honest, I just found this one yesterday, so I haven't pinpointed the exact location yet. But I have my suspicions. I'm pretty sure I know which one it is. You can also refer to the cover of the book to make sure that you're getting all of the information. Again, we see right away this is St. George, Hanover Square. So I know that this hotel is included in that region. I just have to kind of pinpoint exactly which one it is. And I'm going to use all of those resources that are available to me to do that. I'm going to use the census itself. I'm going to use newspapers. I'm going to use electoral rolls. I'm going to use a passenger list, because they often labeled which hotel they were going to, depending on which passenger list you're looking at, and so forth. So even when you're thinking about um, the research process from an international standpoint, if you're looking at the 1921 census with kind of this international lens on, understand that there is a lot of information available to you within the census itself, within the reports from the census, and all of the adjoining research available opportunities, right? All of those different types of records we can wrap up into a nice pretty package and say this is a great opportunity for people outside of England and Wales to find their ancestors that happen to be in the country. This is also a great opportunity for people inside England and Wales to understand what those larger communities look like, right? Maybe the town your ancestor was in was heavily influenced at the time by a group of Polish refugees, right? That happened to settle in that area. So it's an opportunity for us to really examine our ancestors from a very different perspective, but with this vast and rich resource that allows us to see all of these elements kind of all happening in one place at one time, right? You think about all the different variables that we've talked about today. There's a lot of opportunity here from a research perspective. So I hope that that session has been helpful and interesting. I definitely appreciate the kind of the analytical side of history and the statistics around the census. I hope that some of you have found it interesting as well, because it is a big part of why the census was taken in the first place. And yes, the household returns are essential and important, but there is so much more out there with this census to discover. Um, And Audrey leaves us with one last comment. I think this is a great way to close out. Just a reminder that the schedule type is very useful for finding these kinds of facilities, right? Hotels, lodging houses, living over the shop, etc. They are in the EE or triple E schedules for large households, or a W for Wales, or W or WW or WWW, three W's for Wales. So make sure that you understand those types of census materials as well. And all of those resources, the lists of the different schedule types, etc., are available in the content information on Findmypast when you're looking at the 1921 census. So definitely take advantage of all of that information, the reports, the county reports, the census returns, the schedule types, the military schedules. All of that is available to you, and gives you a big broad brush with which to understand the context and time period of your ancestors. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and call it a day. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you participating in Find My Past from Home. I'll put one last thing up on the screen. Remember, if you have a wonderful story or discovery from the census that you've made, or from your genealogical research on Find My Past, we would love to hear about it. Send us an email at discoveries@findmypast.com. We would be more than happy to hear your story and to share your story. We will be back on Friday, and it is exciting. Find My Past Friday this week will be the debut of our lovely coworker Jessie, who is part of our brand team. She works closely with Ellie and myself and Niall and others. She is wonderful. She is enthusiastic and energetic. You guys are going to adore her completely. And she will be on Find My Past Friday this Friday. So don't miss it. You don't want to miss that. She's the newest member of our community, and we're excited to have her with us. All right. With that, we will see you guys all on Friday. Have a lovely rest of your week. And again, send us your emails and let us know what you discover. We'd love to hear from you. Have a great day, everybody.